You've heard their names, you've seen the headlines. But what you may not know is the heartbreak, hardship, and desperation that shaped two young souls into America's most famous outlaw lovers. This is the untold story of Bonnie and Clyde, from birth to bullet-riddled end. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born October 1st, 1910, in Rowena, Texas, to Emma and Charles Parker. She was the second of 3 children in a modest Baptist household. When Bonnie was just 4 years old, her father passed away suddenly. The loss shattered the family. Her mother Emma moved them to Cement City, a poor industrial neighborhood in Dallas, where she worked as a seamstress to keep the family afloat. Bonnie was small, sharp, and full of personality. She excelled in school, especially in writing. She had dreams of becoming a poet, a performer, maybe even a movie star one day. But reality had other plans. At 15, Bonnie married Roy Thornton, a classmate with a rebellious streak. The relationship burned hot and fast, but quickly turned cold. Roy was in and out of jail. Bonnie eventually left him, though they never divorced. She was still wearing his wedding ring the day she died. In an effort to help her struggling mother, Bonnie got a job at Marco's Cafe in Dallas. She worked as a waitress and was well liked by customers, but Bonnie had a soft spot for people down on their luck. She often gave away food to the hungry, meals they couldn't afford. Her boss warned her repeatedly, but she couldn't help herself. One day, she gave a meal to a homeless woman and her child. That was the final straw. She was fired on the spot. The kindness that made her beloved by many had now cost her one of the few stable things she had. And it wouldn't be the last time that doing what felt right would come with consequences. Clyde Chestnut Barrow was born March 24, 1909, in Tellico, Texas. He was the 5th of 7 children born to Henry and Cumie Barrow, poor sharecroppers barely surviving on rented farmland. Like many families during that time, the Barrows were crushed by poverty. In 1922, they moved to West Dallas, living in a tent until Clyde's father could afford to build a tiny wooden shack. Clyde dropped out of school in the 6th grade and worked odd jobs to help support his family. But his heart was in music. He played the saxophone and dreamed of becoming a performer. Eventually, his dreams gave way to reality. The country was sliding into the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce, money was tight, and desperation filled the streets. Like many young men in that era, Clyde turned to crime to survive. By his late teens, Clyde was stealing cars, robbing stores, and running bootleg liquor. In 1930, he was caught and sent to Eastham Prison Farm, one of the harshest prisons in Texas. While inside, he was assaulted repeatedly by another inmate. Clyde eventually killed the man. Another prisoner took the blame. Prison changed him. He walked in as a thief. He walked out hardened, angry, and full of hate. Especially toward Eastham, he promised he'd return one day to get revenge. And he would. That same year, Clyde met Bonnie. It was January 1930. She was 19. He was 20. They met at a mutual friend's house in West Dallas. The connection was immediate. A few days later, Clyde was arrested again. But Bonnie didn't walk away. She visited him in jail. She wrote him letters. She even smuggled in a gun. Clyde used it to escape, though he was caught again shortly after. Still, Bonnie waited for him. When he was finally released, they picked up where they left off, not just as lovers, but as partners. Their crimes started small: gas stations, stores, petty theft. But they quickly escalated. Clyde wasn't just stealing, he was assembling a gang. Bonnie was all in. They teamed up with Clyde's brother Buck, Buck's wife Blanche, and a teenage runaway named W.D. Jones. Together, they became the Barrow Gang. In April 1933, during a shootout with police in Joplin, Missouri, 2 officers were killed. The gang escaped, but they left behind undeveloped film rolls, images that would make them famous. Bonnie with a cigar and pistol, Clyde smiling with his arm around her. Those pictures hit newspapers nationwide. The public couldn't get enough. It was the Great Depression. Banks were hated, the government was failing many, and Bonnie and Clyde, reckless young wild, seemed like anti-heroes to some. But behind the legend was blood. Between 1932 and 1934, the Barrow gang committed multiple robberies and were responsible for at least 13 deaths, including several police officers. In one escape, Bonnie was severely burned when their car crashed. For days, Clyde carried her as they fled. In January 1934, Clyde returned to Eastham and made good on his promise. He led a violent raid that freed inmates and left a guard dead. The FBI and Texas Rangers were now fully engaged. The net was closing. On May 23, 1934, they were ambushed on a rural road in Bienville Parish, Louisiana. Acting on a tip, 6 officers waited. As Clyde's car approached, they opened fire. Over 130 bullets tore through the vehicle. Clyde was killed instantly. Bonnie screamed once before she, too, was gunned down. She was 23, he was 25. Their bodies were put on display. Crowds lined up to see them. They were buried in separate cemeteries. Bonnie's mother refused to let them be buried side by side. In one of her last poems, Bonnie had written, "Someday they'll go down together, and they'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde." They lived fast, loved hard, and died young. Their story became legend, retold in films, songs, and books. But behind the romance was a darker truth. 2 young people shaped by loss, poverty, and a world that offered them little hope. Bonnie and Clyde weren't heroes. They weren't villains. They were a product of their time, flawed, desperate, and doomed from the start. This was their story, the real story.